For 15 years, Eli Hartwell had needed no one. Not since the morning he woke to a cold side of the bed, and a note that said the plains were no place for a living woman. He had stopped expecting people to stay the way other men stop expecting rain. Then, on a gray afternoon in the autumn of 1886, a freight wagon left a stranger standing in the wind at the edge of his Montana range, a woman with a tin pail clutched to her chest like it held something alive. "I'm the one you wrote for," she told him. But the woman Eli Hartwell had written to was already 3 months in the ground, and the woman at his door was her sister. Follow this story to the end, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from, so I can see how far the wind carried it. Margaret Doyle had never in her life seen so much sky. The wagon had been climbing all day through grass the color of old straw, and the grass had no end to it. It rolled out flat and enormous on every side until it met a sky so wide it made her chest ache. There were no trees to speak of. There was nothing to hide behind. The wind came across all that open ground without slowing for anything, and it found every gap in her thin coat, and it told her plainly that she did not belong here. The driver had not spoken much. When the low buildings finally rose up out of the land, a log house gone silver with weather, a sod-roofed barn, a corral of gray poles, he only said, "Hartwell Place," and stopped the team. Maggie climbed down stiff and slow, holding her carpetbag in one hand and the covered tin pail in the other. She set the pail down with more care than the bag. A man came out of the barn. He moved without hurry, the way a man moves when no one has waited for him in a long time. He was tall and spare, brown from the weather, with a beard going gray at the edges and eyes that had learned to expect nothing. He looked at her, and then he looked at the wagon already turning, and something in his face closed like a door. "You're the one from the letters," he said. It was not quite a question. "I'm the one you wrote for," Maggie answered. It was not a lie. It was only most of the truth, with the worst part left out. He did not embrace her. She had not expected him to. He picked up her carpetbag and said the house was through there, and he reached for the tin pail too, and she said quickly, "I'll carry that one." He let her. Inside, the house was clean in the bare way of a man who keeps order because he has nothing else to keep. A stove, a table, 2 chairs, a bed in the corner with a single quilt folded square. No curtains. No softness anywhere her eye could land. It was a place that had decided, years ago, to stop wanting anything. Maggie set the pail by the stove, where it would be warm, and lifted the cloth to look inside. The starter was alive. It had crossed 1,000 miles in that pail, fed flour and water at every stop, and it had bubbled and risen and kept on the way living things do when you tend them. It was the one thing she had brought from the old life that still breathed. She covered it again. Eli watched her do it without understanding. "What's in there?" "Sourdough start," she said. "My mother kept it 40 years. It came over from County Clare before that." She didn't say it was the only inheritance left to her. She didn't say a great many things. "It's flour and water," he said, like a man identifying a stranger. "It's more than that," she said, and let it go. That first night he slept in the barn and gave her the bed. She lay in the dark in a dead woman's place. For the bed had been bought for a bride, she understood that now, and she listened to the wind work at the corners of the house. In the letters, the ones Catherine had read aloud at the kitchen table back in Iowa, this man had written about that wind. "You learn its voices," he'd written. "There's the wind that means nothing and the wind that means snow." Catherine had laughed and said he wrote like a poet who'd never met a woman. Catherine had been the one with the fine hand and the warm words. Catherine had answered his advertisement and courted him through 6 months of ink, and Catherine had been buried in October with the wedding dress still folded in the trunk. And Maggie, the plain sister, the one nobody wrote to, had taken the dress and the start and the last of the train fare and come west in her place, because there was nothing left behind her, and 1,000 miles of nowhere was still more than nothing. Tomorrow, she thought, tomorrow I'll tell him. But the wind outside meant snow, and she already knew, the way you know a thing in your body, that tomorrow would not be the day. It snowed before she found the courage. It came in the night, the first real fall, and in the morning the world was white and silent, and the wagon road south was gone under a foot of it. Eli stood at the door looking out at it for a long time. Then he said, without turning, "That road won't open again till April, maybe May." He said it flat. "Stage won't run. Nobody's crossing those breaks now." Maggie understood what he was telling her. She was here until spring, whether either of them wished it or not. There was no putting her back on a wagon, no quiet undoing of the mistake, no letter that could be unsent. Winter had closed its hand around them both. "Then we'd best come to terms," she said. He turned and looked at her, and she saw him brace for something. So she made it plain, the way her father had taught her to talk price for cattle. "I'll keep your house and tend what wants tending and earn my keep. You'll have the barn or I'll have it, suit yourself, but the bed's mine and the door between us stays shut. Come spring, when the road opens, we'll each say what we mean to do. No promises before then, no claims." She lifted her chin. "I won't be a burden, and I won't be held to anything I haven't chosen." Something moved behind his eyes. Surprise, maybe, that she'd spoken first. "You talk like you've made a bargain before." "I've watched my father make plenty." She held out her hand the way a man would. "Have we got terms?" He looked at her hand, then he took it. His was rough as a saddle. "Terms," he said. It was not a marriage. It was a treaty between two people the world had set down in the snow. But it held, and for a while it was enough, and the starter rose by the stove, and outside the cold went on building its case against them both. She made him bread that first week, and it undid her. She meant to keep her distance the way the terms said. But there is no distance in a one-room house when the snow has shut the door, and a person learns things they didn't ask to learn. She learned that Eli Hartwell could not so much as feed a sourdough start without ruining it. She found him one morning stirring it with a spoon, frowning like it had insulted him, having poured in twice the flour it wanted. "It's gone stiff as plaster," he said, accusing. "Because you're trying to master it," she said, taking the pail away from him. "You don't master a thing like this. You only keep it alive and let it do what it does." She fed it, watched it loosen and breathe. He watched her do it, and watched the bread come out of the oven gold and steaming, and ate 4 pieces without a word, and that was the first time she saw something in his face that was not a closed door. The talk came slow after that, the way it does between people who have each been alone too long. It came in the lamplight while the storms walked over the house. He told her about the cattle, the open range, the way a man could ride a day in any direction and never leave his own grass, and the way that same bigness could swallow him whole. And one night, with the wind screaming and the lamp turned low, she asked the question she'd been carrying. "The woman who left you, was she your wife?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Sarah was her name," he said finally. "We married back in Nebraska and came up here young and full of plans. She lasted 4 winters. He turned the cup in his hands. 5th one she packed a bag and waited for the spring stage and went back east to her people. Said the plains were no place for a living woman. Said she'd rather be poor in a town with neighbors than rich in a place that meant to kill her slow." He set the cup down. "She wasn't wrong. I just couldn't follow her. This is the only thing I know how to be." "You loved her." "I did, and she left." He said it like the second fact had swallowed the first. "After that I figured it out. People go. The weather goes, the cattle go, the people go. So you learn to need no one, and then there's nothing left for the going to take." He looked at her, and the look was tired and honest. "That's the whole of me, Miss Doyle. I'm a man who needs no one. It's safer." And Maggie, who had been needed by no one her whole life, who had grown up the plain second daughter in her sister's bright shadow, who had nowhere on this earth to be left from because no one was waiting for her anywhere. Maggie looked at him and understood that they had arrived at the same place from opposite roads. He had taught himself not to need so no one could leave him. She had never been needed enough to learn the lesson at all. "There's no one east for me," she said. "No people to go back to. The farm's gone, the bank took it after my father died. That's the truth of why I came, not romance. There was simply nowhere else to put myself. She made herself meet his eyes. Eli, there's something I have to tell you, and I should have told you the first day. But the wind chose that moment to fling the door wide on a gust, and the cold poured in, and the lamp went out. And by the time they'd got it shut and lit again, the courage had gone out of her with the flame. Tomorrow, she told herself again. The most dangerous words she knew. He found out before she could tell him, which was worse. It was the photograph that did it. He'd kept it in the Bible, a small likeness Catherine had sent in the spring, when there was still a Catherine to send things. Maggie hadn't known he had it. She found him standing at the table with it in his hand and her own face nowhere in it, and she knew from across the room that the floor had finally given way. "This is the woman I wrote to," Eli said. His voice was very quiet. "6 months of letters, I know her hand. I know how she crossed her sevens." He set the photograph down on the table and laid one finger on it. "This isn't you." The wind filled the silence the way it always did. "No," Maggie said, "it isn't." "Then who in God's name are you?" So she told him. All of it, standing in the middle of his bare house with the snow against the windows. That Catherine was her sister, the fine one, the one who wrote like that and laughed like that and had been promised to him by every letter. That Catherine had taken a fever in September and been 3 weeks dying and was buried before the first frost. That the train fare was already paid, and the dress already made, and there was a man in Montana expecting a bride who would never come. And a plain younger sister with no home and no prospect, and no one in the world, standing in a kitchen with all of it in front of her. "I told myself I was honoring her," Maggie said, "taking her place so the journey wouldn't be wasted, but that's the pretty version. The true version is I had nowhere to go and you were a door standing open and I walked through it under another woman's name, and I'm sorry. I am so sorry. You loved her. You loved her words and they were hers, every one, and I let you go on thinking." Her voice broke. "I let you think she'd come back to life and cross the country to you. That was a cruelty I didn't mean and did anyway." Eli didn't shout. She almost wished he would. He just stood there a long moment with his hand still on his dead bride's photograph, and then he said, "Get some sleep," and went out into the cold to the barn, and didn't come back in that night, though the temperature dropped to where a man could die in it. She sat up till dawn feeding the fire and watching the door. He did not freeze. He came in stiff and silver-bearded at first light, and he ate the bread she put in front of him, and he didn't speak. But he came in. The going hadn't taken him after all. She held to that, small as it was, like the last coal in a cold stove. The thaw between them, when it finally came on the worst night of the year so far. The blizzard hit at dusk, and by full dark it was a wall, no up, no down, no sky, only the white roar of it slamming the house. Eli came in from the barn coated white, having tied a rope between house and barn so a man could find his way back without dying in the 20 feet between, and he stood by the stove shaking and could not get warm. Maggie put the quilt around him without thinking about the terms. She fed the fire. She fed the start, because it was the thing she did with her hands when she was afraid, and the small sour smell of it rose into the room, ordinary and alive, in the middle of all that killing cold. 40 years, Eli said, watching her hands. His voice was raw. "Your mother kept that alive 40 years. And her mother before her. It only dies if you stop tending it." She covered the pail. "Everything does, I suppose. It only dies if you stop." He looked at her for a long time across the lamplight. The closed door in his face was open now, had been open since the night he came in from the cold instead of letting it have him. "I was angry," he said. "Not at you, at myself, for the way my chest dropped when I read that photograph wasn't you." He swallowed. "I'd got used to you, to the bread, to not eating alone, and the part of me that spent 15 years making sure I never got used to anyone stood up and started shouting." He turned the cup in his hands the way he did. "I don't know how to do this, Maggie. I've forgotten how a man even begins." "Neither do I," she said. No one ever needed me enough to teach me. Then maybe, he said very carefully like a man stepping out onto ice he isn't sure of, we learn it badly, together, just this winter. We don't promise past the thaw. Just this winter, she agreed. Neither of them believed it. That was the truest thing about the moment. They each said just this winter knowing they were lying, and let the lie stand because it was warmer than the truth. And outside the storm went on trying to bury them both, and inside the start rose patient by the fire, keeping the only promise it knew how to keep. The winter of 1886 was the one the old men would talk about until they died. The Great Die-Up, they came to call it. The summer had been dry and the grass thin, and the cattle had gone into the cold already poor. And then the snow came, and the cold dropped to where the thermometer had no more numbers, and the open range that had made men rich became a single, endless graveyard. The cattle died standing up. Maggie saw it herself, animals frozen on their feet, drifted to the shoulder in snow, too weak and too cold to lie down. They drifted before the wind until a fence or a coulee stopped them, and there they piled and froze. The whole country was dying out there in the white, and there was nothing one ranch and two people and an old hired hand could do to stop the most of it. Gus Lindqvist made it through from the line camp on the third clear day, half frozen, with the news that the herd was scattering into the breaks where the drifts would take them. Gus was old and Norwegian and had worked Hartwell cattle 11 years, and he looked at the sky and said it would come on again worse by night, and he was right. It was Etta Voss who came the same afternoon, the widow from the next claim south, breaking through on snowshoes with a face like leather and a heart bigger than the territory. She'd lost half her own stock already. She'd come, she said, because a wagon train of folks was pulling out for the railhead while the Gap held the ones giving up, going east to wait out the worst where there were walls and neighbors and a person could die indoors. There was a seat on it. She'd come to offer it to Maggie. You owe this place nothing, Etta said plainly, the two of them apart by the corral. You came under a hard bargain and a sadder story. Oh, the whole country knows it by now, child. News travels even in this. No one would think the less of you for taking a warm seat out of a dying winter. Eli Hartwell expects to be left. He's built for it. You go on and save yourself. And there it was, the road out the way Sarah had taken it once. The chance to be the next person who left him, the way everyone left him, the way he'd taught himself to expect. Maggie looked back at the house, at the thin line of smoke standing up against the iron sky, at the man inside it who needed no one because needing had only ever cost him. No, she said, I'm staying. You'll likely die here. Then I'll die somewhere that needs me, Maggie said. I've never once in my life been the one who didn't leave. I'd like to be her just the one time. Etta looked at her a long moment, and then she nodded like she'd had her own answer confirmed, and she said she'd send what feed she could spare, and she snowshoed back south into the white. Maggie went inside and didn't tell Eli about the seat on the wagon. He found out later from Gus, and the look on his face when he understood that she'd been offered the road out and refused it, that look she kept for the rest of her life. The worst storm came the night they went after the remnant herd. Eli and Gus rode out at dawn to push what cattle they could find toward the deep coulee below the house, where the cut banks would break the wind and a beast might live through what was coming. Maggie begged to go and Eli said no. A woman had no business in it, and she let him think she'd obey, and then saddled the third horse the moment they were gone, because she had not told him the last of her truths either, that she was not the sister who wrote letters. She was the sister who'd worked her father's cattle since she could sit a horse. She knew snow. She knew stock. She had hidden it because a man wants a bride who needs him, and she had wanted foolishly to be wanted. She found their trail and followed it into the breaks as the light went out of the sky at noon, and the storm came down like the lid of a box. She found the horses first, standing tail to the wind near the coulee mouth, and no men with them. She got down and put her face to the wind and screamed their names into the roar and heard nothing. The cold was the kind that stops being cold and starts being a warm, drowsy peace, which is the cold that kills you, and she knew it, and she made herself afraid on purpose to stay alive. She worked the coulee rim on foot, hand over hand along the cut bank, and she found Gus first, down in a drift with his leg wrong under him, and then she found Eli 20 feet on, down on his knees in the snow with his arms still around a calf he'd been trying to carry, too far gone with cold to stand, too stubborn to let go of the one life he'd thought he could save. "Get up," she shouted into his ear. "Eli Hartwell, you get up." "Can't feel my legs." His voice was thick, peaceful, terrible. "Go on back, take the horse. No sense, both of us." "I am not leaving you." She got under his arm and hauled, and he was a tall man and dead weight, and she was not strong enough, and she did it anyway, the way you do the thing you cannot do when there is no one else to do it. "Do you hear me? I am the one who doesn't leave. I crossed 1,000 miles to be the one who doesn't leave, and I'll not have you die in the snow and make a liar of me. Now get up." And something in him, she would never know if it was the words or only the body's last animal will, something got him to his feet. She tied them together at the waist with the lead rope so the storm couldn't take one without the other. She got Gus across the saddle. She put Eli's hand in the horse's tail and her own arm around his middle, and she walked them out of the breaks by feel, into a white world with no marks in it, following nothing but the slope of the land downhill toward where the house had to be, talking the whole way, talking so he'd answer, talking so she'd know he was still alive at the end of the rope. The thin smoke saved them. She saw it before she saw the house, that line of gray standing up out of the white, the fire she'd built that morning and banked to last, the one warm breath the dying world had left. They stumbled into it more dead than living, the three of them, and she got them in and got the boots off frozen feet and packed the worst of it in snow to bring it back slow, the way her father had taught her. And she fed the fire till the iron of the stove glowed, and somewhere in the long black middle of that night, the cold gave them back. By dawn the storm had blown itself out. Gus would keep his leg. Eli would keep his feet, all but 2 toes the cold took as its toll. And on the stove, untended through the whole ordeal, the start had gone on bubbling in its pail, patient, alive, asking only to be kept, and Maggie laughed when she saw it, a cracked and exhausted laugh, and then she put her face in her hands and wept because they had all of them lived, and no one had left, and the winter had not won. Spring came to Montana the way mercy comes to the condemned, slow and late, and almost too cruel to bear after the waiting. The great die-up had emptied the territory. Whole outfits were ruined. Men who'd been cattle kings in October walked off their land in May with nothing. The range, when the snow finally drew back off it, was a thing Maggie would not describe to anyone who hadn't seen it. But down in the deep coulee, where 2 stubborn men and 1 stubborn woman had pushed them through the worst of it, a remnant of the Hartwell herd stood gaunt and breathing in the new grass. Not many. Enough. Enough to begin again from, which is all anyone has ever had. The road south opened in the 2nd week of May. Eli came in from the corral one evening and stood in the door the way he had the morning the snow first closed it, and he said, "Road's open." Maggie went still at the stove. This was the thaw. This was the edge of the bargain, the place where each of them was to say what they meant to do, no promises past the winter. She had known the day would come and had dreaded it the way you dread the one question whose answer can end you. "So it is," she said. "There's a stage Thursday." He turned his hat in his hands the way he turned the cup. "I won't hold you. The terms were the terms. You stayed the winter, and God knows you saved my fool life doing it, and you owe this place nothing now. If you want the road, it's yours, and I'll see you have the fare and more besides." Maggie set down her spoon. She crossed the room to him. She had rehearsed nothing, and so she only said the truth, plain, the way she'd talked terms by the wagon that first gray day. "Eli, the whole of you is a man who needs no one. You told me so the first week. You built it careful over 15 years so the going could never cost you again." She put her hand flat on his chest. "I'm asking you to ruin it. I'm asking you to need me. Not because you've nothing else, because you've chosen it. Because the lie you've lived by, that a man's safest needing no one, that lie nearly froze you to death in a coulee, and the only thing that got you out was a woman who needed somewhere to belong badly enough to come after you. We don't get through the winter alone. Nobody does. The whole territory just proved it. He looked down at her hand on his chest. When he spoke, his voice was rough as the first day. I came in from the barn that night, he said. The night you told me who you were. I stood out there in the cold and I thought, here it is, the going, same as always. And then I came in instead, sat at your table, ate your bread. He covered her hand with his. I think I'd already decided that night. I just didn't have the courage to know it. And now I'm a man who needs you, Eli Hartwell said, plainly, and I'd rather say it out loud and risk the cost than live one more winter pretending I don't. They were married in June by a circuit preacher in the dooryard, with Gus standing up for Eli on his mending leg, and Etta Voss weeping into a handkerchief and swearing she wasn't. Maggie wore her own dress, not her sister's. Catherine she'd buried properly in a cedar box under the cottonwood by the spring, with a marker, so that the woman who'd written all those letters would have a place on this land she'd loved on paper and never seen. Eli helped her carve the name. They tended the small grave, the way you tend anything you mean to keep. And on the morning of the wedding, before any of it, Maggie had risen in the dark and fed the start one last time and set the dough to rise, and by the time the preacher came it was bread, the first loaf of the new life, gold and steaming on the bare table that was bare no longer. 40 years her mother had kept that living thing alive. It had crossed an ocean and a continent and the worst winter the plains had ever known, kept breathing through every cold that meant to end it, asking only to be tended and never let go. She understood it now for what it had always been, not flour and water, a promise handed down, the plain and patient truth that nothing survives alone, not a start, not a herd, not a man on his knees in the snow, not a woman nobody ever wrote to. That you keep each other alive by refusing to stop, and that needing was never the weakness Eli Hartwell had spent 15 years believing it to be. It was the only thing, in the end, that had made it through the winter. That's the full draft ADIF, 9 parts to 9 phases, female vantage, the die-up as the impersonal threat, the substitution twist, the starter motif, with Eli's clumsiness beat, the endurance win, and the needing isn't weakness, moral inverting the title.